Okay, still with the UN, Israel appears to be escalating a dispute with the world body. Now, Israel's refusing to allow a top UN official into the country. It follows an Israeli call yesterday for the UN chief to step down. And in the past hour, the head of the UN has responded and said his comments yesterday were misinterpreted. The CBC's Chris Reyes joins me now from New York with more on this story. So Chris, can you first take us back to those comments yesterday from the Secretary General that so upset Israel?
Yeah, absolutely, I can, Arthi. And I think it's really important that we give a very clear picture of what happened. I was here for that speech at the UN. It was a high-level Security Council meeting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken in attendance, as well as the foreign ministers for Israel, the Palestinian Authority, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, who later would call for this resignation. He was at that meeting as well. The Secretary General was invited to give the opening remarks. He spoke for 6 minutes. He started off by saying that the crisis in the Middle East is spiraling. He then gave an unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and called the attacks on Israel unprecedented. He said there was no justifying those killings. And that's when he said this line that angered the representatives from Israel. He said that it is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. And Arthi, I want to read in full what he said right after to give you the right context. Secretary General António Guterres went on to say, the Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They've seen their land steadily devolved by settlements and plagued by violence, their economies stifled, their people displaced, their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing. The grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The ambassador to the UN from Israel heard this entire speech, but obviously that line was enough to call for the resignation. Have a listen to what he said right after the meeting.
The SG is blaming the victim. You are blaming Israel. This is a pure blood libel. This is a pure blood libel, and I think that the Secretary General must resign.
And Ambassador Erdan didn't stop there. Speaking to Israeli radio, he said that to teach the UN a lesson, Israel would refuse a visa for the Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs. That's Martin Griffiths. The foreign minister for Israel also canceled a meeting with the Secretary General. Arthi, this is a major setback considering that the UN has taken the lead in trying to broker a deal to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, where it is desperately needed.
And so now, Chris, today we heard that statement from the Secretary General. What did he have to say in reaction to those calls to his remarks yesterday?
He pushed back. He said that he was shocked by how his statement was misrepresented. Again, it's unprecedented for any kind of resignation call for the UN Secretary General. I don't think this has ever happened before. This is a post where you have to walk a very diplomatic tightrope, as I like to call it, and often this position is not embroiled in controversy. Have a listen to what he said outside of the Security Council.
In the beginning of my intervention yesterday, I clearly stated, and I quote, I have condemned unequivocally the horrifying and unprecedented 7 October acts of terror by Hamas in Israel. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring, and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets. End quote.
You know, Arthi, the way I read this is that this is not a minor difference in opinion that will easily resolve itself. This is a fundamental difference. Yesterday, at yesterday's meeting, the foreign minister from Israel was quite impassioned in saying that the world's reaction to these attacks should have no middle ground, no moral ambiguity. and he balked at the idea of a ceasefire. He then pointed his finger at the general direction of the Secretary General and challenged him to take the same position, or else the United Nations would fall into its darkest hour. So you can just imagine that kind of exchange happening yesterday. I don't see how this would easily resolve itself, and no doubt more fallout will come today, and we'll certainly listen for it at the Security Council this afternoon, where an important vote is going to take place with the United States introducing their resolution and introducing it for a vote at the Security Council on a statement on this conflict.